Hi guys, welcome to the final class of the semester. Woohoo! Just a few announcements before we get started. So please make sure that if you are planning on taking the final exam, that you notify me in advance of the final exam. Just for reference, the final exam is scheduled for Tuesday at 1:30 p.m. So I need to know. I would actually like to know by end of day today if you're planning on taking the final exam. That being said, these summaries that you're writing up that you're responsible for, you will need to have those submitted before the final exam on Tuesday. If I come in at Tuesday morning and see that you've not submitted, I'm going to contact you and say, are you planning on taking the final exam? If I don't hear back from you, I'm printing out the final exam. And so I'll expect you to sit there. So is submission of the summaries that you've been working on, those are a required part. You don't have to prepare summaries for your own presentation, but you do have for everybody else's. All right. And just as a reminder for group 2, the group, I guess the group 4 is going to be group 4 is going to be going last. If you need to hide this video panel, you can just click on hide or floating meeting controls right here, get that out of the way so you don't have to mess with it. But group 2 called dibs, I'm presenting first. And as we know, as accountants, dibs are non-negotiable, okay? Dibs are non-negotiable. So group 2 is up and I will get out of the way.
I didn't use the computer. Oh, yeah. All right. Hi, everyone. So our research was about the use of data analytics in auditing and assurance. My name is Anna Laux.
My name is Saraswati.
I'm Mary Monick. I'm Hannah Helsenbeck. I'm Leanne Woodring. I'm Hannah Mullen. So just to give a brief overview of what we'll be talking about today, we're going to give a brief introduction and then get into the history and background of data analytics and auditing. We will then discuss the current status and how it's used today before talking about future considerations and wrapping up with a conclusion. So for a brief introduction, data analytics and auditing is an analysis of complete sets of data to identify abnormalities and trends for further investigation, and it can also be used to provide evidence. Some key applications of this are risk assessment, process automation, predictive analysis, and visualization tools. Risk assessment is used to identify unusual transactions and trends that may indicate fraud or misstatements. Process automation is used to streamline audit procedures by automating repetitive tasks. Predictive analysis is used in data analytics and auditing to use historical data to forecast potential risks and irregularities. And visualization tools are used with data analytics and auditing to create graphical representations to highlight key insights and improve decision-making. And these visualization softwares make it possible for an auditor to see trends in detail over time.
So now Hannah and I are going to talk about the background of the data analytics and auditing. So in early 2000, the company started moving from papers to digital record keeping. This made it easier to keep the track of the data. Around that time, they also started using the ERP systems to manage the things like accounting, payroll, and inventory. And in mid 2000, new audit software tools came in. These tools helped auditors to work faster and check large amount of data. One example is ACL, which could scan large sets of data to find errors and patterns. Another tool was IDEA, which helped with the data extraction and testing. And in 2011, Big Four firms started investing more in technology. They began hiring people who were good with data and started using more tasks to make audit faster and better. They saw how it could be really useful in audit. And in 2014, ISB officially said that data analytics could be really useful and important in audit. This was a big step forward. And in 2016, a group was created just to focus on how to use the data analytics in audit. They started working on how to bring those ideas and tools into the official audit standards.
So continuing with the background in 2017 to 2019, this was really the start and early stages of the integration of AI and machine learning in data analytics and auditing. These tools enabled predictive analysis, as Anna mentioned earlier, anomaly detection, which found unusual processes and behaviors, and automated document review, which analyzed and processed documents without human interaction. In 2019, there was a growth in enhanced data capabilities and continuous auditing. This led a shift to relative real-time data monitoring, which evaluated, processed, and reviewed the data streams that were coming in continuously. They also made continuous auditing models during this time. In 2020 and 2021, COVID-19 accelerated remote accounting due to the pandemic and the response. Firms led to more data analytics because they could not get in-person documents. There also was an increase in demand for dashboards, visualization tools, and cloud-based systems. In 2022 and onwards, there's more regulatory guidance and integration into standards. The professional world had multiple responses to this, but the main response was through certifications. And the two primary certifications are a Certified Information Systems Auditor, CISA, and Certified Data Analytics Professional, CDAP.
So Anna and I are going to talk about the current status of auditing or analytics within auditing and assurance. As Anna was talking about earlier, there's a lot of great application for auditing as a whole, but I want to talk more specifically about how it can help in the different steps of the auditing process. So this visualization here is from a survey conducted by the CPA Journal. And in blue here are Big Four respondents, auditors and managers in auditing. And then orange is non-Big Four respondents. So basically they asked them, do you use data analytics within these different areas? So as you can see in like risk assessment and audit planning, calculating sample size, data extraction, and most of these areas as well, data analytics is pretty highly used. So as for some specific examples of how we can use data analytics within the audit process, for risk assessment, we can do stuff like do a trend analysis of an account to determine whether it's meeting expectations and might need more attention if it's not. And you can also run like entire account through it to find any potential misstatements or errors, just to help you direct your focus for the audit into these areas of higher concern. As for test of controls, it can do stuff like making sure segregation of duties are working properly, checking to see if a user has just authorization or just test or recording functions, and not both. And then finally, for substantive procedures, it can do things like create a predictive model for different accounts like depreciation expense, interest expense, things that are easier to predict. And then finally, you can use it to analyze individual account receivable accounts to determine whether they're exceeding the requirement or the credit authorization that they should have in those accounts. So a great example of how a Big Four firm is using data analytics within their auditing process is EY's Private Audit Experience. This is a program that's specifically geared towards private companies, and it works to digitalize the whole audit process. A lot of different steps here, but mostly it's like just making it easier to connect between the auditors and the people working at these companies. And where data analytics comes pretty heavily into play is this analyzing step, where they use UI Helix to do a lot of these processes that I was talking about before, and help build audit evidence to support their opinions.
So next, the most in current ways that data analytics are being used in fraud detection. It's really broad, but to break it down into some main ways that it's used, pattern recognition and abnormality detection is one of the main ones, where the systems can find abnormal transactions that deviate from the business's normal patterns. The next major way is predictive modeling. Machine learning models use historical data from previous frauds to predict future frauds. And as these machine learning tools are continuously learning, they become more accurate over time in predicting fraud. The next major way data analytics is used in fraud detection is through automated alerts and real-time monitoring. So for this fraud monitoring system, it tracks transactions in real time. And as an abnormal transaction occurs, it triggers an alert. This is most common for credit card fraud detection systems. And the last major way that data analytics is used in fraud detection is data matching and cross-referencing. And with these fraud detection systems, they compare multiple data systems for inconsistencies. This is most commonly used for tax to find duplicate filings and false claims.
So now we will be moving into future considerations, which Mary and I will be covering. And I will be talking about emerging trends and innovations, specifically cryptocurrency and blockchain, and then ESG analytics. So cryptocurrency and blockchain, for one key tool that is currently being used is PwC's Halo for blockchain. This allows auditors to verify cryptocurrency using cryptographic proof, which is where you take a private key. So the client would sign a message with their private key, which would be a password or their signature, and it would be matched to a public blockchain address, which would be something like a bank account or a crypto wallet. And then auditors can go deeper by interrogating the blockchain directly, by recalculating wallet balances and verifying timestamps and addresses. And since blockchain is more tamper-proof and independent of client systems, it makes it pretty reliable audit evidence. And then they're also looking ahead to NFT auditing, which is where they would verify ownership and apply blockchain tools to track transactions, history, and manage risks like fraud and market volatility. And then another thing would be central bank digital currencies, or CBDC, which is it's occurring more and more as central banks decide to do digital currencies. And so they would do this, they're creating audit models for this, which would require testing over data governance, anonymity controls, cyber resilience, and then looking at transaction visibility to both third parties and employees. Now, moving on to ESG analytics. So right now, a big thing is using automated supply chain data collection to track things like emissions, water usage, waste. One example of this would be global electronics manufacturer would be able to see that they're using maybe 80% of their water consumption in 3 factories. And so they would be able to look at that and able to spread it out and focus on the areas on a smaller scale. And then you can also use this for predictive analysis. One example would be like a food company would be able to anticipate crop yields and weather disruptions in order to reduce food waste. This allows for carbon accounting, which you could use sensors for the automated supply chain to track that, or an ERP-linked data system. And since blockchain's decentralizing transparent ledger system enables secure tracking of materials, products, and transactions across supply chains, enhances traceability, and supports responsible use of resources and facilitates circular economy practices for like things like recycling and take back initiatives. These are all very important to increase sustainability within an organization. And you might be asking, why is this important? Well, first, there's investor pressure with the more concerns about like climate change and sustainability in general. You might have investor pressure to make sure that you are actually reporting correctly. And then second of all, there's SEC climate disclosure rules where it requires some publicly traded companies to report their SEC, like their carbon emissions to the SEC. And then so auditors need to ensure ESG metrics are accurate and verifiable, not just for compliance, but also to avoid greenwashing, which is when you make your company or product seem more sustainable than it actually is.
Okay, and then moving into some other future considerations, one big thing is regulatory changes and requirements. So obviously, since we don't know really where the future of AI is going to take us, it's a little hard to predict the exact standards that might change from here on. Or however, there have already been some changes. So the PCAOB in 2022 has actually enacted the Technology Innovation Alliance Group, which is basically an external group of professionals who give guidance to PCAOB on emerging trends and actually give suggestions for possible changes to standards. And from that kind of collaboration, there's already been 2 changes that are going to be enacted as of December 15th of this year. So AS 1105 and AS 2301. These are just basic clarifications for auditors now with the use of data. So basically, one of them, for example, is saying that if you're using electronic data for your audits, you need to have a lot of controls in place over the IT general and application controls. And then also for the future, with all of the changes in federal funding and programming, it's also something to kind of keep in mind that if the PCAOB is dissolved and kind of folded into the SEC, which is how it was prior to Enron, that could also have a lot of changes in standards and regulations. And then the last 2 things we'll look at are the changes in the organization. So employers have already shown a greater increase in trying to invest in their people. For example, doing a lot of extensive training in data usage, as well as promoting innovation and really celebrating successes with this data. And then also, as Hannah mentioned, also kind of trying to get their employees certified in data. And then also there's going to be a close collaboration between teams. This is already emphasized in a lot of companies, but just with all of the AI, there's going to be a lot of emphasis on open communication between all channels. And then also something I came across was critical thinking. So although AI is really streamlining these processes and making audits potentially more efficient and faster, it still can't replace the critical thinking skills that accountants need in their everyday lives. So the Journal of Accountancy has these 4 steps that they laid out for accountants to both use technology, but also keep that kind of important aspect in mind. The first thing is developing the right mindset, which is basically when you're presented with this data, you need to make sure to have a questioning mind and not necessarily trust it implicitly. And then you can finally move on to using the technology to automate those tasks, use real-time scenarios to kind of immerse yourself and prepare for when you encounter that situation in your everyday life. And then finally use the data visualization techniques that we talked about to complete the audit.
Yeah, so we'll end with some conclusions. The traditional audit method, as we know it, is that in the digital landscape that we are in, there's so much data, there's so much large amounts, and companies are so reliant on data that they cannot operate without data analytics. They also, data analytics, the traditional method does not allow for fast update. There is a lag and delay in response for auditing, and with data analytics, they can speed that up. So counteract the points of traditional audit methods. Auditors have to embrace data analytics for the future. It is the next step. It is what they can take to make audits better. Okay, any questions?
So, talked about continuous auditing a little bit earlier in the presentation. That's actually been a phrase that's been bandied about for 20 years, ever since I started auditing, which doesn't seem like it was that long ago, but it is 20 years ago. What do you think is the main impediment to continuous auditing becoming the standard for auditing, as opposed to kind of this periodic audit that we still do?
I think it has to do with how in depth, because a lot of the continuous auditing and the examples that I found was like over data stuff and more automated. And then there are some parts, more physical aspects that you have to have that are a lot harder to do continuously. So parts of it can be very continuous, but then parts of it you're going to have a set time.
All right, and then you talked a lot about visualization, which visualization is kind of an interesting place with auditing, because visualization, I think, has got a lot of benefits, but we don't see that traditionally used as in reporting. Do you think that auditors should, or at least standard setting bodies should consider the possibility that audit reports would be more beneficial if they could use visualization?
I think so. I think it makes it easier for managers to make decisions and really visualize, I guess, everything that's going on if they have a picture or a graph to go off of instead of just looking at the numbers. I think it's a helpful tool.
Then kind of my last question, something we actually talked about in AIS earlier today. One of the students was talking about the use of AI tools within Microsoft package, and we hypothesized that within the very near future, there's going to be a point where you can ask Excel to do something and not necessarily have to know the formulas or the tools to do it, and still be able to do it. Do you see that becoming a problem for data analytics and auditing, where there's going to be an expectation that people can just ask for the technology tools to do something, as opposed to actually knowing how to use data analytics tools?
Yeah, for sure. That's kind of what, when I was talking about the critical thinking slide, that's what I came across a lot of times, like with the audit evidence, it's just transmitting an answer. And then it found that auditors like could not explain why or how like it got to that point. And so I definitely think that is something to fear at the moment. It's just people automating everything. So it's definitely important to keep in mind critical thinking skills and trying to learn the background behind everything and not just trusting it implicitly.
Personally, looking to automate auditing purposes. Any other questions? Good job. Okay. All right, Tyler, if not wearing a hat, that's how we know he's serious.
You know, not sure what. All right. I'll take inside sometime first. Yeah, let's try. I think he set us to do something with should be good. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Yupendra.
Jack. I'm John. I'm Tyler. I'm Andrew.
And today we're going to talk about PCAOB, which stands for Public Company Accounting Oversight Board. I think the other group, they just gave a like side introduction about PCAOB, so we're going to talk more on that. Starting with our agenda for today, I'm going to talk more on introduction and background, like why PCAOB as an organization was established and was it necessary or not. Zach is going to talk more on inspection and structure process. Tyler will talk through current status. Andrew will go over future consideration, and John will be wrapping up with our presentation. But before starting with why PCAOB, what is PCAOB? It's important to understand why PCAOB was established, and this slide should pretty much talk more on why it was established. Because after the big scandal that took place in early 2000, there was not any trust on the financial statement and even the auditors, because there was a big scandal going on. So this really affected the financial statement at that period of time. And this actually triggered one of the most significant regulatory changes in US. That was the creation of PCAOB. So now let's talk more on PCAOB. So PCAOB is a nonprofit oversight board that was established by Congress and under the SOX Act in 2002. They're mainly overseen by ACCT, which stands for Securities and Exchange Commission. Their major work or like major rule is to regulate the audits of public companies and to review different compliance reports filed under federal securities laws. Here it is really important to know that PCAOB as an organization does not go and do audit for companies, but they look after different auditors. So they are doing a proper monitoring of auditors and making sure there's not any fraud going on. So just a very easier mission would be they're trying to work to protect any investors, like it can be you and me as well, to make sure those audit reports published by different companies are true and they are trustworthy. You can see a small map here where about the locations of PCAOB offices here in the US. So now let's move on to the core responsibilities of PCAOB, what they do on a daily basis. The first one, which is really important, is they register different public accounting firms. So if a company wants to audit a public accounting firm, they will have to get registered with PCAOB. So those company will be part of PCAOB and they can do a proper monitor of those auditors. Second one, they set standards for account auditing, and this is not just for auditing, but also for different ethics, quality control, and independence. And they usually do this to make sure the auditors are they are held high level of professionalism. The third one is inspecting. Their major work for PCAOB is to inspect different audit firms' work and internal quality control system. Zach is going to talk more on this inspection part because that is their main responsibilities. And finally, fourth one, also most important, is if there are any kind of violation or any kind of like fraud going on, then PCAOB has an authority to investigate and also discipline the firm or individual who are involved in that. Moving on more functions of PCAOB as an organization, because it is kind of important. They really try to enhance their inspection. We have talked about this through the other presentation as well, like how it has been developed and evolved. So PCAOB has been trying to like update themselves with different rules and be more effective. Second one is modernizing standards and rules. With AI and machine learning going on, it is necessary for PCAOB to stay up with the rules as well. So they have been updating rules to reflect current challenges like cybersecurity and data analytics in audit. That I think for data analytics, I should not explain a lot because we just had the presentation too. And they're pretty much focused on investor protections through different enforcement of rules. And they work on organization effectiveness that includes engaging with stakeholder for transparency and responsiveness of those financial statements.
All right, so now to give some further background of the PCAOB, I wanted to go into a little bit further detail into their leadership structure. So they have 5 board members that are appointed by the SEC. These are all finance and accounting related professionals whose goal and commitment is to protect shareholders and ensure that these audit firms are following the correct rules and regulations to ensure that they're collecting the correct amount of evidence and ensuring independence of these audit firms when they're auditing certain clients. And there's no more than 2 CPAs allowed on the board, and they serve for 1 5-year period, can't run for re-election. And then also I wanted to touch on the funding. So the funding comes from all the firms that register with the PCAOB, and obviously since it's a nonprofit organization, these fees, it's an annual fee that they charge, and it's essentially just to cover their annual budget for their operations. Yeah. And then now to go into more detail with the basis of their inspection. So obviously this is one of their major functions. So the purpose of the inspection simply is just to ensure that they're complying with the rules set by the SOX Act in 2002, the PCAOB themselves, the SEC, and other professional standards that they should be holding themselves to when performing their audits, certain procedures within the audit reports, and then other related matters, anything to do with the audit process. And then obviously the goal for each inspection is to improve the quality of the audits being conducted. So they want to find any sort of deficiencies or errors within the audit process, especially with the development, with the use of certain technologies and data analytics that we've touched on, and improving and making sure that these audit firms are ensuring that they're doing their due diligent work and making sure that they have enough evidence and correct evidence to come to their opinions. And then obviously, so there's over 1,600 firms registered with the PCAOB. So obviously not every firm is going to be inspected on a year-to-year basis. So their selection criteria to choose which firms to inspect over their year-to-year basis. So any firms that offer over 100 audit opinions, have 100 clients that they give audit opinions for, they're going to inspect them annually. And any firms with less than 100 audit opinions, it's going to be done once every 3 years or at random. And then obviously, so the final product is an inspection report. And this is not an overall rating tool. It's kind of like the audit firms can't provide absolute assurance. They're not going to look at every area within the audit. So any area that they might find a deficiency in doesn't mean that the rest of their audit process is free of errors. They just simply it's not time efficient enough for them to dive in and to inspect the entire audit process. And then lastly, just to go over the steps within the inspection process. First of all, they're going to select the areas to be inspected within the audit process. This usually is done by a risk-based method. So when the areas within the audit that seem to be more complex, or there's more potential, errors within finding potential misstatements due to the complexity of that, or certain, market conditions that could make those accounts being, more complex, or being done at a random basis, or if there's been a deficiency or error in the past with that audit process, they'll usually inspect that again. And then obviously define if there are any deficiencies. They're going to review the work papers and interview the engagement team on their audit process, really learn and understand what they did to collect evidence to support their opinion. And then obviously the work papers, they're going to, see exactly the type of evidence and things that they, collected to come to their opinion. And then once they find certain deficiencies, they're going to look for how significant they might be. And if they feel like there needs to be change, they'll actually give the audit firm a chance to maybe correct or fix some errors within their audit process. And if they feel that the audit firm hadn't done that appropriately, then they will file and go on with the report. And the report kind of has three different stages in it. Part 1A is just to explain the deficiencies within their audit process. The second part would be any deficiencies that directly violate rules set by the PCAOB. And then part 1C is any SEC or PCAOB violations within following the independence rules. Then lastly, if there's if they catch them involved with any sort of fraud schemes, anything like that, then the proper enforcement can be done with the PCAOB's enforcement branch, the SEC, or any appropriate law enforcement matters.
So now I'm going to talk about the current status. So in 2021, there was a total board turnover. The entire board was fired by the SEC because of an SEC report that came out that year. It detailed a hostile work environment within the PCAOB. There was a culture of fear and distrust and just miscommunication on the board. And there was some whistleblowers. An SEC report came out and they fired the entire board. But because of this, 4 of the 5 current members of the board were all appointed at the same time in 2021 during this. So they all work together much closer, and they have a great amount of cohesiveness now compared to the previous board. They issued a plan for 2022 through 2026, which had 4 main goals seen here. Goal 1 is to modernize standards, which has already been touched on. There's some technological innovation, and they need their standards to keep up with those technological advancements. Goal 2 and 3 go hand in hand, enhancing inspections, trying to identify any violations of the standards. And goal 3 is making sure that any violations of those standards are met with harsher penalties. And so that way, no other firms feel the need to do that. And goal 4 is undoing that previous hostile work environment. It's improving organizational effectiveness. This is improving transparency for the stakeholders, as well as just creating a better working condition for the employees themselves. So they have had an increased activity in recent years since the turnover. They've had more activity in standard setting and rulemaking in 2023 than they have in than any year in the previous 10 years. And for example, in 2024, the PCAOB published 3 releases. These are the things that become actual SEC rules and that people have to follow. For reference, on average, they usually only have around 1 per year. An example of a recent change is the change made to confirmation. This becomes active on June 15th, 2025. Some examples of the details within it: they completely reworked the confirmation, so the existing confirmation document is now invalid. They kept most of it, but they did make some notable changes. One of those was a change to negative confirmations. According to the new rules, negative confirmations can now no longer be used as the sole source of assurance and must be used in conjunction with other sources. Another one is more technological based. It allows for a direct access view of cash for auditing cash. The way that this would work is that the auditor would receive a login from a financial intermediary, be able to put that into their website or app or what have you. And they would be able to directly view the client's information from that financial intermediary when auditing cash. So, yeah.
So moving into more future considerations, there are a number of topics that need to be talked about as important relation to PCAOB. First one would have to be the impact of AI being used in PCAOB operations. So how it's going to impact we've seen across all the auditing industry that AI is being used with Halo, Helix, Clara. Major auditing firms are already using AI to automate their more mundane or repetitive tasks that time is better spent not being done by auditors by hand. Obviously, this has made auditing much faster and more efficient, but this introduces a new element of risk and something that needs to be accounted for when making their auditing rules, the PCAOB making those rules. This brings uncertainty because now you have to account for the AI and the softwares that do these tasks for you. And the PCAOB needs to consider these factors when they make new rules and regulations, because when the auditor trusts their AI and their software to do a task, they need to be able to trust that it's being done reliably. And same thing with clients, when they decided to use their own AI and own software to do not auditing practices, but more financial focus tasks that auditors would go in and analyze. It's important for there to be rules and regulations regarding what these softwares and AIs can actually do as a way of ensuring accuracy outside of requiring the auditor to go in and redo every single step that the AI has just done. It'll make it simpler, and you'll be able to trust the AI to actually do its job more consistently, creating standards for how the AI and these softwares are structured. Some major goals they have moving forward, as we've touched on previously. In 2025, the PCAOB aims to target audits conducted on firms in industries with special accounting requirements. These requirements generally focus around the economic and geopolitical conditions of the given markets in which these firms exist. This is a little bit different compared to the 2024 main goal, which was more focused on internal auditing and focused on reliability and building trust and accuracy from the auditors. This new goal aims to focus more broadly on firms that may not get audited as consistently or as reliably because of these factors of uncertainty. And this will help the overall auditing industry, because now that there's a foundation of trust and consistency from the auditing side, there can be more emphasis put on reaching those firms that need to be audited, not just testing for legal or fraudulent activity, but also to ensure the accuracy of these firms. The last major point that needs to be considered when talking about the future of the PCAOB is its possible dissolvement. There's legislation in the House of Representatives right now that would result in the dissolution of the PCAOB entirely. What this timeline kind of looks like is, in the last few months, this bill has been presented and deliberated about whether it should pass or not. And the bill states that upon enactment, upon use of it passed into law, how it'll work is within 1 year, all of the PCAOB requirements will be fully transitioned to the SEC. And at the end of that year, the PCAOB will cease to exist effectively. This may be inspired by the trial run that the SEC had in 2021, as Tyler spoke about previously, where they had to fire a bunch of people. And there was a brief window of time where the SEC had to manage the jobs of the PCAOB because there was no board. There were no board members at that time. So the SEC had to take over and do those jobs for a little bit of time during 2021 while they were finding new people to put on the board. The House might have recognized this as an opportunity to remove a government body that may not need to exist. As we've spoken, as Tyler mentioned before as well, they only do between 2023 was a big year for them, but before that, on average, 1 a year. It seems that their tasks can possibly be handled by the SEC. Considering all they already have to do, it may not be something that drags the SEC down completely, and they might be able to manage it completely. How this would change how auditing would look without the PCAOB, assuming the SEC doesn't make any major changes to what the PCAOB is already doing, and just picks up the slack and does the job that the PCO did before, it shouldn't change very much. The concerns would come from if the SEC decides to make massive changes that completely revamp how auditing is done.
Thank you. So moving on to our moving on to our conclusion and kind of reiterating some of the points that we've made. The PCOB was created because of major accounting scandals, and it was just to help restore investor confidence. And its main mission is to oversee audits of public companies and ensuring they are conducted fairly and accurately. And moving on to more recent changes, the PCOB underwent board turnover in 2021, marking a shift in leadership with new goals and priorities. And there has been a greater activity in standard setting and rulemaking, with more focus on improving the quality and compliance of audit. And then looking ahead, the integration of AI is expected to enhance the quality of audits by improving risk assessment and compliance. And the piece, like he said, the PCOB is being considered to be dissolved pretty much. And the SEC would take up those responsibilities. And then moving on to further consideration by their 2025 objectives, they aim to enhance audit standards and improve the overall effectiveness of inspections. With evolving standards, the PCOB seeks to improve both the quality of audits and the protection of its investors. And also, once again, touching upon the dissolution of the PCOB, this would impact the regulation of public company audits and overall auditing landscape as a whole. There we go. Any questions? That's right.
So obviously, the big looming question is whether or not the SEC will, or the PCOB will dissolve the SEC. One of the issues that we talked about early in the semester is we talked that before the PCOB, the accounting industry was self-regulated. That basically means that one firm would oversee the work of another firm, and they would say if there was good quality of the work or there was deficiency, which led to kind of the fiascos that we saw in 2002. Is there a possibility that if this, based on what you found in your research, is there a possibility that if the SEC takes over the PCOB, if they pull the PCOB into them, that we could reach an environment similar to what we saw in the late 1990s where you just basically says, okay, you're self-regulated? And what would be some problems or issues with that?
Sure. So obviously with any transition of tasks, there's the possibility that the SEC is going to say this doesn't matter enough and push it back down to the wayside, and we could end up in an environment where it's just companies regulating and checking in on other companies. That's a very real possibility. With the improvements in technology and the implementation of AI and machine learning into many auditing practices, it seems unlikely, as there's a very new element, and there's definitely the financial side of it. The government would more than likely want to dip its hand in the cookie jar and get a little bit out of it. But some of the risks that this would present is, as we've discussed, fraud would definitely be a big one. Without a governing body to oversee it all and make sure that people are staying in line and firms are not, saying, you paid me enough, okay, I'm gonna make sure your numbers look right, but are probably not right. There needs to be somebody that steps in and looks over it all and says, all right, don't do that. That's not the good thing. And make sure that there's legal operations, and it creates an environment of fair play where you don't have to guess if your competitors are cheating or not.
It's interesting too, because I think from what I've read, the Trump administration, they want deregulation in this area. And it's definitely scary with potentially going back to the way it was, being super self-regulated. So
this is actually something that was bandied about during the first Trump administration, because he was rallying cry at the time of drain the swamp. And so there was a lot of concern with the banker and PCOB, but then people said, well, the PCOB is too small to go beyond the chopping block. With the Department of Governmental Efficiency being a big thing now, this is certainly a real possibility that they can do that. Let's think to a happier possibility. The PCOB does not get eliminated. You talked about the board requirements and that there is financial expertise required on there and CPAs on there. With the advent of kind of blockchain and AI and all of these technological evolution, do you think the PCOB needs to update its criteria to have some sort of technology expert as part of the board?
Most definitely. I think that's a big part now of the audit process and being able to understand that if these audit firms are, following the proper rules and getting the appropriate information from the data and technology being used. So I think at least one board member with those sort of qualifications would be super beneficial.
So let's assume that you all were the five of you are the board of the PCOB. Here's the chief of the board.
Not me.
Okay.
We'll let Tyler be.
Yeah, I was gonna give it to Kendra. I mean,
Oh, or
I'd
He
second
can
that
do it.
vote, yeah. Yeah, second that
Kendra, all
vote,
right,
yeah.
Kendra, you're in charge of the PCOB now.
Okay, I'll take it.
Any other questions? Yeah. Good, that there's a better the PCOB being out here.
In a couple months of wage, yeah.
Okay, so let's have on stage. All right, as the slide says, everyone, thank you for your semester. I'll look forward to talking to you again, but best of luck to all of you in your future pursuits and take care.